Rock and roll has always been known for promoting authenticity, a no BS attitude, and to quote the Jack Black movie School of Rock, sticking it to the man. And for many rock stars, this personality has shown itself in many interviews. When someone famous is interviewed, it's generally expected that they should act politely and professionally. However, some rock stars would rather be blunt and pull no punches than hide behind the facade of professionalism. At times, this trait becomes apparent in public interviews and has led to some eyebrow-raising statements that either made for great publicity or generated controversy. Here are a few rock stars whose brutal honesty in interviews raised quite a few eyebrows. Kurt Cobain. Everyone knows the Kurt Cobain tragedy. In 1994, at the height of Nirvana's fame, Kurt took his own life, sending shockwaves worldwide. The singer and guitarist had struggled with depression and drugs for most of his life, and on that fateful day in April 1994, it simply became too much for him to handle. But in a 1993 interview for MTV, it sounds as if Kurt was giving audiences a peek into his troubled mind. Kurt was one of many artists interviewed by the channel for a special on the negative effects of drugs. Speaking on the topic, Kurt lamented how he was being associated with heroin despite never promoting its use or going out in public while intoxicated. In a spooky statement, Kurt revealed there was a time when he didn't want to live, and that if he was going to go out in a bag, he might as well satisfy his addictions. It's as if he was prefacing the tragic events that would end his life a year later. Corey Taylor. Once upon a time, Corey Taylor was a mess and got in trouble often for his alcoholism and substance abuse issues. Today, the Slipknot and Stone Sour singer is in a much better place, and he's not afraid to shed some light on his troubled past. In an interview with Loudwire, Corey confirmed that he once OD'd on coke when he was a teenager. Instead of taking him to a medical facility, his friends threw him in a dumpster where he woke up. He also confirmed that at the time he was just 15 years old and had already developed an addiction. It's a messed up story that could have cost him his life early on, but thankfully he got himself cleaned up years later. Henry Rollins. Hardcore punk legend turned spoken word artist, actor, and TV personality Henry Rollins is known for preferring a life of solitude. Sure, he's put himself out there for the public, but in his personal life, he maintains a close-knit circle of friends, has stayed childless, and hasn't had a romantic relationship since his 20s. When asked about the possibility of entering a new relationship in an interview, Rollins said he gets bored with most women. He reveals he hasn't had a girlfriend since 1988, and his relationships with women ever since have mostly been hit-and-run flings. He also reveals his high standards for women, implying that since most women can't meet these standards, he prefers not having a romantic relationship. Keith Richards. Since day one, Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards has never been afraid to tell it like it is, even if his thoughts go against general public opinion. In a 2015 interview with Esquire, Richards trashed the Beatles' landmark album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, despite the record being unanimously considered one of the greatest albums of all time. The comment came after the interviewer compared the Stones' '60 material with that of the Beatles. Richards then proceeded to take a swing at Sgt. Pepper, saying, "Some people think it's a genius album, but I think it's a mishmash of rubbish." That's pretty harsh for such a seminal album, but that's what one can expect when asking Keith Richards' opinion. Jonathan Davis. It's no secret that Korn frontman Jonathan Davis has had his share of problems in his youth. These very struggles helped his vitriolic vocals and lyrics for Korn right from their explosive debut album. He's also struggled with anxiety, depression, substance abuse, PTSD from being sexually molested as a child, and even schizophrenic tendencies. In a video for the U Rock Foundation, Davis gives more details about his struggles and their effects on his life. He shares the difficulty of dealing with anxiety and depression because he's not sure what's happening, only that something's wrong. Davis reveals he spiraled into a state of paranoia and schizophrenia. He started thinking his meds were meant to sabotage him and that someone would put something in his food. According to the singer, it took a concerned or perhaps disgusted look from his 2-year-old son to convince himself to get cleaned up, which he eventually did. Peter Steele. The late Peter Steele of Typo Negative may look menacing to strangers, but colleagues have often said he's one of the nicest people you could ever meet. Despite this, Steele considers himself an introvert who still experiences stage fright despite a successful career. In a 1996 interview for MTV, Steele claimed that he doesn't enjoy being around people and prefers a life of isolation, which is ironic considering his job is to perform in front of thousands of audiences. He says he only does so because he loves writing, music, and it's an escape for him. It's hard to doubt Steele's passion for music, but it's surprising to know that someone with a reputation for being generous would prefer to be by himself. Phil Anselmo. Best known as the powerful voice behind Pantera, Phil Anselmo's substance abuse problems have been well documented. He's since cleaned himself up, and in a talk at the Loyola University School of Music Industry, he shared his past experience with addiction and his road to recovery. One of the notable parts of his talk was his story of the last time he touched a needle. He recalls that he gave his best friend a small shot of heroin, who then began overdosing. Phil tried everything to revive his friend, but he remained unresponsive. Panicking, he hit his friend as hard as he could in the chest, which was enough to wake him up. Phil stayed with him for the rest of the night and thought he had just killed his best friend and revived him. It was the last straw for the singer, and after that, he gave up the needle for good. Bob Dylan. The legendary Bob Dylan has given the world countless iconic songs and moments throughout his career. One of these is an interview with Time magazine early in his career, which actually sounds more like a tirade than an actual interview. The interview was included in Dylan's 1967 documentary, Don't Look Back. Here, he rants against the press, specifically Time magazine reporter Horace Judson, for the magazine's tendency to report false news. He accuses the magazine of spreading their biased reading of his persona and music as truth, such as branding him as a folk singer. He famously said, "If I want to find out anything, I'm not going to read Time magazine. I'm not going to read Newsweek. I'm not going to read any of these magazines." Talk about being in your face. John Lennon. John Lennon is responsible for one of the most famous or perhaps infamous quotes in rock and roll history, when he said that the Beatles are more famous than Jesus. It probably wasn't an exaggeration either, knowing John. Perhaps he really believed it when he said it. The comment sparked public outrage, which happened at the height of Beatlemania. The Beatles may have been the biggest musical act at the time, but the controversy John caused proved that they were not invulnerable. To address the controversy, the Beatles manager Brian Epstein got the band in a series of press conferences where John could explain himself. Did it work? Not that much. Some continued protesting against the band, burning their records and picketing their concerts. The Sex Pistols. No other band personified the rebelliousness of punk rock as much as the Sex Pistols did. They didn't care where they were or who was in front of them. They were proud to be punks who talked and acted as they wanted. One of the band's most memorable moments was when they guested on Today with Bill Grundy in 1976. Throughout the interview, the band members made a mockery of the show by responding to Grundy's questions with sarcasm. Despite being on live TV, they also didn't mind dropping a few curse words here and there. But it was after Grundy flirted with Susie Sue, who was also a guest, when Pistols guitarist Steve Jones unleashed on the host. Jones called Grundy a dirty old man, along with other insults that were accompanied by numerous F-bombs. Again, this was on live television, and Jones's expletive-ridden tirade against Grundy triggered controversy. Of course, this only helped establish the Pistols' notoriety. Interviewers can always count on rock stars if they want to hear honest, unfiltered truth. Whether it's an unexpected fact about themselves or opinions that go against the grain, rock stars can be the most brutally honest people on the planet if they're asked the right questions.